Matthew 7:26 states, "And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand." In essence, it's a parable about the importance of not just hearing Jesus' words, but actually living them out in order to have a strong foundation in life. Imagine building your dream house. The design is perfect, the materials are top-notch, but there's one crucial mistake. You've chosen to build it on sand. Jesus tells us about this foolish builder, and it's more than just a story about construction. Every time we hear God's wisdom but choose to ignore it, we're just like that person building our lives on unstable ground. Think about it. The same waves, the same storms hit both houses, but only one survives. It's not enough to just listen to good advice or nod along in church. Real wisdom, real strength comes from putting God's words into action. So today, ask yourself, are you building your life on solid ground, or are you just piling up pretty walls on shifting sand? The parable. The verse is part of a larger passage, Matthew 7:24-27, where Jesus compares those who obey his teachings to a wise man who built his house on solid rock, and those who don't to a foolish man who built on sand. Building on sand. The house built on sand represents a life built on a weak foundation, prone to collapse under adversity. This could be a life built on superficial beliefs, fleeting desires, or ignoring spiritual truths, hearing versus doing. The verse emphasizes that just hearing the words of Jesus is not enough. True discipleship requires action, putting his teachings into practice in daily life. Consequences. The verse implies that those who fail to act on the words of Jesus will face negative consequences, like their life falling apart when faced with trials and tribulations. What is the meaning of Matthew 7:26? Jesus is illustrating the difference between living by his teaching versus not living by them. The person who follows Jesus' teaching is like a man who built a house on foundation of rock. When the violent storms came, the house stood firm. What does the sand represent in Matthew 7? The foundation of sand represents those who do not obey God and his word, trust in him, and walk by faith, that we see he is all we truly need, the greatest security through the temporal and eternal storms of life. What does sand teach us? Research has shown that engaging in sand play stimulates divergent thinking, problem-solving skills, and the ability to generate new ideas. Fisher, 2018. As children manipulate the sand, they experiment with different textures, quantities, and shapes, honing their cognitive abilities while having a blast. In a spiritual context, sand often symbolizes vastness, abundance, and the transient nature of existence. It can represent both the infinite potential of the universe and the instability of the physical world. Sand is also used in religious practices like sand mandalas, and is associated with concepts like spiritual alertness and the need for a strong foundation, vastness, and abundance. In the Bible, sand is used to describe the immensity of God's promises and the countless nature of his blessings. For example, God promised Abraham descendants as numerous as the sand on the seashore, instability and transience. While representing vastness, sand can also symbolize the ephemeral nature of life and the need for a firm foundation. The parable of the wise man and the foolish man in Matthew 7:24-27 illustrates this. With the foolish man building his house on sand, which is easily washed away, while the wise man builds on rock, which is stable. Spiritual practice and symbolism. Sand mandalas created by Buddhist monks are intricately designed and then ritually dismantled, symbolizing the cyclical nature of existence and the impermanence of all things. The sand itself can also represent the dust from which we come, and the elements that make up the earth. Spiritual alertness. In some spiritual contexts, sand is associated with being spiritually alert and having a firm foundation in one's beliefs and practices. What does blood represent? Blood represents life itself, both physically and metaphorically. In many cultures and religions, blood is seen as a sacred substance, representing vitality, sacrifice, and the essence of life. It can also symbolize redemption, cleansing, and the act of making a covenant. In some cases, blood can also represent guilt, violence, or the darker aspects of human nature. In a scientific context, blood is the life-sustaining liquid that circulates throughout the body, carrying oxygen and nutrients to organs and tissues. It plays a crucial role in the immune system, fighting off infections and keeping us healthy. In religious and spiritual contexts, in the Bible, blood is often associated with life and sacrifice. The spilling of blood is seen as a symbol of death and loss,